All right, well, hey everyone, we are back for this week's culture segment for the Boundless Show. And if you listened to last week, you know that we are in a conversation with Jerry Jenkins and Dallas Jenkins. Dallas is creator and director of the series The Chosen. And now Jerry, his dad, is writing a series of novels, The Chosen. First novel title, Jerry?
I Have Called You by Name.
Okay. And last week, and I'm heads up, everyone, if you didn't listen to last week's show, listen to that, to this interview, because this is a continuation of that conversation. And I want to pick up where you left off last week, Jerry, in talking about this scene, first represented in the series, and now you're describing it in detail in the book itself, of Mary, basically, I mean, let's just be honest, sitting in a bar. She is not doing well. She is literally demon possessed, oppressed. She is, she's nothing in society. And it's so fascinating to me because in both watching that scene and reading it in the book, it's like, how many of us feel like that is us? I mean, feel like we may not be on paper screwed up like that, but we're screwed up. I mean, we are messes. And many of us feel, I mean, we may fight with our own thoughts. We may fight with our own pasts, our shame. And talk to us, I mean, that really gripped you last week, Jerry, when you were writing that. Why is that such a pivotal message for a generation of people today who are struggling with identity in that sense?
Yeah, when I mentioned too that part of the fun of being a novelist is you get to be the characters. Mm-hmm. And so in this scene, you've got a bartender, a guy who's sympathetic to Lilith. He thinks that's her name. Mm-hmm. Mary's been hiding behind this name. And you've got Lilith or Mary, and then you've got Jesus. So at different times, I'm each of those characters. Mm-hmm. And I can empathize with Saul trying to help his friend, and
Saul the bartender.
Yeah, Saul the bartender, and as I've said, it's hard to identify with Jesus because he's perfect, but he's also compassionate toward her. But the beauty of that scene to me is that he knows who she is. He knows everything about her. She has no idea who he is, and when she realizes that this is her Redeemer, it changes everything.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Well, and it's so, again, I just think even in reading that scene and again seeing it in the show, that whole idea of like, for those that are, the chosen, for those that are part of the family of God, he loves us as much on our worst day as on our best. Right. And the whole idea of like, that is the gospel, and the grace of the gospel is that is what he does and what he gives to us and imparts to us that we could not conjure up for ourselves. It's a big deal.
You realize, I think, in that scene, and it's so beautifully done on screen too, is that she didn't do anything to earn that. Mm-hmm. She could have turned over a new leaf every day the rest of her life. Yep. And she came to Jesus as she was. In fact, she didn't even do it voluntarily. Mm-hmm. He approached her and called her by her name. Yeah. That's grace. Yeah. And boy, that's what we want to identify with. Yeah. I hear so much from young people. I've served on the board of a couple of Christian colleges, and they tell me that more and more kids come to college with so much baggage and so much anxiety that they can't even fill all the appointments that are needed for counselors from day one, because they are searching for who they are and what they're about and why are they here. And these are Christian kids coming to study the Bible. Yeah. And here's the answer. Yeah. Jesus is always the answer.
Yeah. Okay, Dallas, let's start with you on this one. This is another probably common question, but I think one that's a matter of curiosity for a lot of people. Looking at some of the other characters in the series that you flesh out a great deal, and we feel like, like you said, oh my goodness, Peter, married, now we got to know his wife. You feel like you know these people. Who is the character in the series that you most identify with, and why?
Well, this may sound like an easy answer. Or
are you going to say Jesus? No. Okay, thank you, because that would be very awkward. I'd have to confront you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. this wouldn't be airing if I ended up saying.
I mean, because that's who I identify
Right,
with.
right,
So I'm
of
just
course.
saying, I didn't
Yeah.
want you to take my answer.
Yeah,
Okay.
good. But I really mean this. I really can't think of a character that stands out, because when we're writing, you really are trying to put a piece of yourself into all of the characters, and you're finding the connection with all of them. And I really do, even though I'm not Matthew, for example, who we portray as being on the Asperger's or autism spectrum. I mean, I can identify with that as having a daughter who's autistic and having a lot of experience in that area. Simon Peter I identify as being a kind of a passionate guy, and the marriage that we portray in season 1, the relationship has some similarities with my wife and me. But so while I can't identify with the totality of any one character, the specific scenes, the scenarios we put them in, some of the ways that they approach things are rooted in our experience, my experience, my study of the brain, my study of humanity. All of those things come into play, which is why I think that one of the most consistent comments we get about the show is it feels human, it feels authentic, it feels like a viewer is saying, I identify with this person. That's me. That was sitting in the bar. Maybe I wasn't demon oppressed, or maybe I wasn't even struggling with alcoholism, but I can identify with Mary's vice and her pain and her depression. I can identify with Nicodemus as a person who's been a believer in God his whole life, but is now experiencing something new and is not sure what to do with it, and is being faced with a choice to give up his life to follow Jesus, and a lot of people can identify with that. So I really do find similarities and connections to each of the characters because we're writing them. So there's no way to get around that. So
Yeah.
I don't want to give a kind of a pat answer, but there isn't really one character.
Picking the favorite child. It's
Yeah,
hard.
it really is. That's really what it
Well,
feels
and you
like.
do kind of have to like get into their heads
Yeah,
so
yeah.
extensively. All right, Jerry, what would be your answer on that?
Well, I do love the Mary character and the Simon character and the Matthew character. I have to say I probably most identify with Nicodemus because our ages are similar. And I love the fact that the actor who played him too was so emotional in that scene. It happens when I was 8 years old.
In the scene with Jesus where they meet under cover of night, and
Yep.
the whole John chapter 3 scene.
Right. When I was 8 years old, I was in the hospital with rheumatic fever, and my mother took that opportunity to help me memorize John 3. And so for the, to go decades later and see my son bring that to life on screen was pretty moving. But to hear Eric, the actor, talk about that and apologize to Dallas for being too emotional in the scene. And Dallas said, it could have been that way, so let it happen. That really brought that character home to me. I mean, being raised in the church, I'd hate to think I'm Pharisaical, but, you learn all the rules, you know what to do and what not to do. And here's this person saying, you missed the boat. Here's what it's really all about. So I really identify with Nicodemus.
Yeah. Well, let's hop back into the present day, because I want to ask you both, again, here we are talking to thousands and thousands of young adults, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, who are like, okay, well, it's easy for these guys to say because now they're like successful and they're just like making movies and writing books and doing all this stuff and hanging out with cool people. And I'm just like working in this bank and trying to pay my bills. And I like how you tell the story, Dallas, of, you've done projects before and you had a couple projects that you felt were pivotal in your career in being very disappointing times, very trying times professionally, just feeling like, do I need to check out and be doing something else? Talk to us about that. And then, and Jerry, you too, misses, disappointments. Like, how do you wrestle with, is this really what I'm called to be doing? Like, or what if I missed my calling? What is God telling me to do? The angst around that.
Yeah, I mean, this story of The Chosen and how it came to be is something that I wish, or the lessons that I learned from it is something I wish I would have heard when I was in my early 20s, because I could have saved myself a lot of frustration, I'm sure. But I had this movie project called The Resurrection of Gavin Stone, which came out it was released in theaters on January 20th, 2017, which I'll never forget because it was Inauguration Day. And it was also the day where everything fell apart for me in my career. this is a movie. I'd achieved my dream of having multiple big-time Hollywood production companies financing and producing the project that I was really passionate about. They were excited about it. They were planning to do more movies with me. And these were big-time production companies. And yet, even though they were financing and producing it, the content was still mine. It was still very much the gospel. And so I had everything that I had kind of hoped for. And then it came out and it was a complete financial bomb. And we knew within just a couple hours that it was. And so I'm home alone with my wife, crying and praying and confused and saying, essentially, I guess this isn't for me. I mean, I've been trying to do this for over 15 years. And maybe I'm not supposed to do movies anymore. I mean, and in just a couple hours, I went from being a director with a very bright future to being a director with no future. And it was in that moment that God really impressed on my wife's heart very explicitly the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And this is a story that I think not only influenced my career and kind of helped birth The Chosen, but it's also kind of influenced, I think, the content of the show itself. And what we saw when we were reading the story of the feeding of the 5,000, when God kind of pointed my wife to that. And we noticed a few things that we hadn't noticed before, even though we've heard the story many times. And one of which was that Jesus knew exactly what was needed in that moment. So, in fact, not only did he know, but in many ways it was his fault. The fact that they were so hungry, the people were so desperate for food, was because he'd been talking for 3 days. And he had gotten them to the point where the only thing left to satisfy them was a miracle. He brought them to that place. And when the disciples came to Jesus and said, these people are hungry, we need to feed them, we should send them home, he was like, oh, no, we can't send them home. They'll faint along the way because they're so hungry. So he knew exactly what the situation was. And so that allowed us to feel like, okay, this failure doesn't necessarily mean we're outside of God's will. You know, sometimes we feel like that when we fail, is like, oh, I guess we missed the boat. I guess we did the wrong thing. And that story kind of helped remind us, okay, maybe this God's part of this. So we don't know what's next, but we do know that there still could be potentially something miraculous. And in fact, a phrase that God gave my wife also was, I do impossible math. She just felt him saying that phrase, felt that on her heart. And we thought that meant, okay, the box office numbers are going to magically turn around this weekend, and we're going to have this amazing testimony. And they didn't. Nothing happened. And so that night at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was writing a 15-page memo, analyzing everything that had gone wrong and assigning blame, mostly to myself. And because I really didn't want that to happen again. I didn't want this kind of failure to happen again. But I was really trying to surrender. And up on my Facebook messenger just popped out of the blue from someone I've never met. Still haven't met them to this day. But we were Facebook friends. And he didn't say hi or hello or heard about the movie or anything. He just said, remember, your job is not to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish. Mm-hmm. And I honestly wondered for a moment if my computer had been recording what I'd been talking about that day. I was just like, huh? And so before I even responded, when I responded, I just said, what are you doing up at this late at night? He goes, well, I'm in Romania. I'm on a different time zone. I'm here visiting my brother. I said, why did you tell me that? And he said, he just goes, it wasn't me. God just wanted me to share that with you. And that moment, my life changed forever. Because I'm a person who does believe it's my job to feed the 5,000. I'm responsible for it all. I have to accomplish things. And I felt responsible for the failure of the movie. But I really genuinely got to a point where I was content with, as long as I was in God's will, bringing 5 loaves and 2 fish was all I was responsible for, and the rest was up to him. And I really did believe it. And I bought into it, and I was okay if that meant never making another movie. As long as the loaves and fishes that I did provide were as good and healthy as they could be, so that if God did multiply them, that they could be satisfying. And that's what ultimately led to me doing this short film for my church's Christmas Eve service about the birth of Christ from the perspective of the shepherds, which felt like a significant step down from a Hollywood motion picture. This is just a short film for my church. But I put everything I had into it, and that ended up going viral and being the catalyst for this potentially the opportunity to do the show, which I'd had this idea for a little while. And the distribution company said we should raise the money through crowdfunding, which I thought was ridiculous. And very, very long story short, that short film that I did for my church ended up generating over $10 million in crowdfunding from over 19,000 people, shattering the all-time crowdfunding record. And when we hit that number, I remember my wife sitting next to the computer, and we hit this $10 million, and she looks to me, and there's tears in her eyes, and she says, I do impossible math. And God was laying it on her heart very explicitly that moment, that that's what he meant by that phrase. And so that philosophy, that approach has led, I think, to being surrendered to this whole process and just going, I don't know where we're going to get a boat and fish and a lake for this miracle fish scene, but I'm going to trust that God has this, and it's just my job to provide the loaves and fish. And I don't know how I'm going to keep doing these seasons. I don't know where the money's going to come from because this was crowdfunded. But, I mean, now the show has exploded, and I'm sitting here with my dad, who wrote the Left Behind books. Now he's writing The Chosen, novelization, and it's all come full circle. Just because I think...
On set, filming the next season.
Yeah, and as I stand before you now, we are officially the first ever multi-season show about the life of Christ, because we're doing season 2 as we speak.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jerry, any advice for young adults who may be struggling kind of exactly where Dallas was with calling, with trusting God, with their future, as one of those older shepherds, as you as you alluded to yourself as?
I'll be the old shepherd. It's where you need to get to. And it's interesting how God gets us there. I was a young teenager when I felt that I was supposed to be a writer. I was a professional sports writer at age 14. I wasn't even old enough to drive. My mother had to drive me to the ball games and stuff so I could be a stringer for this local paper. But a couple of years after that, I felt a call to full-time Christian work. And I remember thinking, well, that's the end of the sports writing. And I'm not going to be a writer. I'm going to have to be a pastor or a missionary. And the wife of the speaker that night at camp, when I went forward to, because I definitely felt this call, she said, don't be too quick to give up the writing. It may be the vehicle you use to answer the call. And so I was never called to be a writer. I was called to full-time Christian work, and this is simply the vehicle. So I had to get there too, where you kind of say, my dreams of success or becoming an author too, those are all temporal things that I have no control over anyway. I don't control who buys, how many buy, who writes good reviews or not, what kind of royalty checks I get. My success comes from obedience to the call. It takes all the pressure off. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with Dallas. And I can remember him telling me the story about, I thought Gavin Stone was a fantastic movie. I still do. Mm-hmm. It just was destined to fail for the sake of this project. Mm-hmm. Get to the place where you can accept failure as a doorway to success, and not success in the world's view of becoming somebody, being known. As you say, people say, well, yeah, it's easy for you to say you're somebody. For one thing, we aren't anybody, but at one point we were both unpublished, unknown. Just obey.
Mm-hmm. Good point. All right. Okay, a couple just kind of fun questions here as we finish up. So we're already thinking about and talking about book 2 here, Jerry. Clearly we're on set where season 2 is being filmed. Any sneak peeks or anticipation we can talk about of what people can look forward to?
Well, as we speak, I mean, we're a day before the week of Sermon on the Mount week, which is where we literally have almost 3,000 people coming to the set. All are going to be COVID tested, not only before they left, but the morning of, before they're allowed on the set. This season we show a little bit of the behind the scenes of the Sermon on the Mount. And we even see Jesus writing it and formulating it in his head, and then we see the crowds show up. So that's for sure a highlight. But the season overall is really about that next step. So season 1 is Jesus has publicly announced that he's the Messiah. He's got about 7 disciples right now, and they're starting to grow. What happens when the fame starts to increase? What happens, both good and bad? Now there's more people coming to Jesus to be healed, but there's also more people coming to Jesus as enemies. What does that do for our band of followers who are inexperienced and unknown and don't know what to expect? You start to see the interpersonal dynamics. We really start to explore kind of where they go next and how they deal with this. And it's not always pretty. It's not like Jesus called, so now everything's rosy. For sure, the tension starts to ratchet up.
Okay. Anything different, like in the feel of filming this season versus the last? Any lessons learned, or?
Well, for sure. I mean, I think one is, as we go into season 2 now, we are a show that has a huge fan base, and so with that comes more pressure, you know, and they're watching everything we do, and we really try to, you know, our YouTube channel, our Facebook channel, our Instagram page, we're giving tons of behind the scenes info. But back when we first started, I mean, it was just a few thousand people watching us and interested in what we were going to do next, and now it's millions, and so that for sure adds kind of a little bit more pressure to it. But at the end of the day, it really is just, you know, when our cameras are rolling and it's the actors and me working on this scene and just trying to make it as great of a scene as possible, that's still the same. I think the production value is bigger in season 2. We filmed the first half in Utah, in this incredible Jerusalem set that had been built that we had an opportunity to make use of, and now we're on this huge property right now here in Texas, 1,000 acres. So we have more access to things now than we did in season 1, but it's still ultimately about the people. It's ultimately about Jesus and his relationship with each individual. So we're just trying to do as best we can.
Yeah. I do think it's kind of weird, the first century Whataburger restaurants is going to be awkward to work in, you know, with the Texas influence.
Yeah, there's work to kind of paint those out of the background.
Where you're going to go with that. That's if they don't get the fish again, you know.
Yes,
then
yes.
it's like, you know what, just drive down the road, y'all.
Uber Eats is more popular than ever now. Let's just do it. Yeah.
We've got it good. So, okay. Any other, and Jerry, maybe you can speak into this too, thoughts about, this was actually one of our listeners asked us this on Instagram. Okay, after Jesus and the Gospels, like, any thoughts of, like, what other part of Scripture would you like to tackle, or another storyline or piece of that? What would that look like for you?
We've talked a little bit about that, just because I'm curious where he's going to go with this. And, you know, my hope is that, you know, you either go to Paul in the Acts of the Apostles or Peter. You know, he's such an interesting character in this series, too. There's so much, there's so many resources in the New Testament that, you know, I could be long gone and in heaven, and he could be my age, and he could still be doing this. So I'm just hoping that he does keep
I just
going.
want to get through season 2 first.
You're just trying to do that. I'm just going to put in a vote for Elisha and the she-bears. I just want to see that play out and see, you know, what you would do with that. I'm just saying.
No, it would be fun. But the little Easter egg in episode 3, with Jesus and the children, which is, of course, covered in this novel as well. When we're doing we show a montage of Jesus kind of getting to know the children better, and he tells the story of Elisha and the she-bears. And so when you see Jesus stand up and roar, he's acting out that story. And that's one of the interesting things about the show and about the book that we really try to do is we incorporate a lot of Old Testament stuff because they were storytellers, and that was their history, and there was what they were drawing on. So, yeah. We do flashbacks to the Old Testament occasionally, and in season 1 and season 2, and we'll continue to do that.
There was a little homage to me, actually, in that little episode.
Tell us.
I was pleasantly surprised when I saw it the first time. When the kids were little, they used to sneak into my office, you know, if I was working or something. They'd hide under the desk and try to scare me or surprise me. And, of course, I could always hear them. They'd breathe or they'd giggle or they'd, you know. So what I would do is I would just make a bunch of embarrassing noises, you know, raspberries and snorts and sneezes and this and that. And they'd laugh, and I'd flush them out. And basically, Jesus does that in that scene. And
when Abigail and Joshua from episode 3 are hiding and watching Jesus, he hears them, and then he starts making these crazy noises to get them to laugh. And that was based on my experience trying to sneak up on my dad growing up. So.
I was hoping to see that in the credits, you know, based on. But
right.
It wasn't.
Yeah. Oh, very fun. Okay, so final question. So for that listener who's listening right now, we know the Bible is, because it says this of itself, it is transformational. It is living. It is active. It has the power to change your life. For that person that's listening and is like, man, you guys, I'm just trying to hold my life together. I'm trying to stay in my job. I'm trying to deal with my family. I'm trying to whatever. I don't know if I have time to add this Jesus to the mix, or I don't know if I can really trust him with my future. What would you guys say?
Well, I think that as the show and the book illustrate, in many ways, you have no choice but to to make room for Christ, because you're ultimately, when you're focused on, like what you just said, I'm trying to stay steady in my job, or I'm trying to find my career, or I'm trying to make this relationship work, or whatever it is, those really are just temporal things. They're not ultimately what your heart's cry is. And every time that you rely on yourself or fellow human beings, there's going to be failure. And you're going to reach that point. You just will. Even if you're successful financially, you will reach that crisis point. Everyone does, where you have to make a choice. And that's the moment where Christ is there. And in episode 1, and in this book, when Mary's desperate and trying everything, she's trying things to make her feel better. And Jesus puts his hand on hers, and the first words of Jesus' mouth in season 1 are, "That's not for you." And there's a reason for that, because Jesus is transformational, and he says, I'm going to take who you are and make you into someone who you are not yet. And that's what the show is, that's what the book is all about, and that's what the Bible, I think, ultimately is Jesus makes us who we're not yet. And that's what anyone who's listening is, if they're experiencing that, it's because they're trying to find answers in the now, in human or in humans or in a career or whatever, and ultimately it's going to create desperation. There will be that crisis point, and Jesus offered it to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus chose to not give up his life. He offered it to Simon and Mary and Matthew, and they chose to give it up, and they will find themselves, and they found themselves far more joyful than Nicodemus.
You may have plans, but get ready for Jesus to interrupt your plans.
Yeah. We use the word intrude. Jesus is very intrusive, but in the best way possible.
In the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think the biggest mistake that young people especially can make is to think that Left Behind or The Chosen, either the series or the books, are a substitute for the Bible. They're not a substitute. They're a catalyst to get you back into the Bible or to get you there for the first time. Even today's Christian kids often think, well, I get it that our faith is based on this old book of parables and, allegories and stuff, but is it really relevant today? Give it a chance. That's what we want. We don't want you to say, you don't need the Bible, you can read this. It's just a start. Get to the Bible.
Awesome. All right, well, the book is now available, focusonthefamily.com/chosen. You'll find out everything about it there, how to get it, just released, all of that, the additional stuff that's going on around that. Clearly, we've talked, Dallas, about you are filming season 2. Season 1 is available now, officially, correct?
Yeah, season 1's been out for a while, and season 2 is coming out right now as well. So
see, we're ready to go. So you can get both of them as companion series. We're going to have all the links available, like I said, to get more information on that. But thanks, you guys, so much for this little behind-the-scenes look at really what this is all about, and ultimately about Jesus, the one that it's truly all about. So thanks so much.
Thank you.